In this video we start to finalize our rendering by putting the render layers back together and making the first adjustments in the compositor. So in the last video we prepared all the different render layers and now it's time to render these out. However, before we do this, let's check our resolution one more time. We have a 2K square resolution here, which is what I'm aiming for. However, if you're not sure yet if everything will look fine, you can also reduce the percentage here. So for example 50%, then it will reduce the resolution by 50%, so it will be only 1080 by 1080p. Then it will render much faster and you can check if it has any errors or mistakes, adjust these and re-render quicker. However, I have a relatively strong machine, so I will render this at 100%. And then all we need to do is to hit F12 and wait a bit. So rendering all the render layers took 2 minutes for my computer, which is relatively fast. And now to check all the different render layers, you can go up here and click through these, background and mist. Here you can see this is the actual image which was rendered for the mist layer, but we can check the mist pass here, which was rendered nicely. You can see the transparency has a little bit of issues here for the mist pass, so we might render this again with a higher samples count later on. But I think this should be enough for compositing the render layers. Let's go back up here and now let's switch over to the compositing workspace. Before we get started with the compositing, let's clean up the workspace a bit. Let's get rid of the dope sheet. We don't need it since we will not animate anything yet. And we can also get rid of the timeline down here. And over here, let's move this down and let's open up the image editor, which we will need in a second. And let's make this a bit bigger. And over here, let's press N to hide the sidebar. Then in order to get started with the compositing nodes, enable use nodes. This will add the render layers node and the composite node. The render layer is of course the scene we have rendered, and over here the composite node will be the final image we output with all the changes we are doing here in the compositor. Of course, we want to see what we are doing here, so we can add a viewer node by pressing Ctrl Shift left click on the render layers node. This on the one hand will add the preview here in the background, but we can also go over here to the image editor and click this little button and search for the viewer node and click here. Then press Shift and the home key to full screen this, and here we can also see what we are doing inside the compositor. Basically everything which goes inside the viewer node will show up now also here in the image editor. Let's middle mouse button click, move this over and disable all the overlays, so this is a bit cleaner. And we still have the properties editor down here if we want to tweak anything. For the backdrop, we can press V to zoom out, Alt V to zoom in, and we can hold on Alt and middle mouse button click to drag it around. But since the nodes are lying on top, this might be sometimes a bit confusing, so let's disable the backdrop for now. And in order to keep our compositing nodes a bit more aligned to each other, let's enable the snapping with the grid option enabled, and now they will snap to the grid in the background here, and then they will always align perfectly, as you can see. Now to get started, let's put all the render layers back together. So first we have our creature here, then let's press Shift D to duplicate this, and let's pick our environment, then Shift D and pick the background here. Then in order to pack images with a transparent background on top of another image, we have to add the alpha over node. Simply hit Shift A, click on search and search for alpha and pick the alpha over. First we want to pack the creature on top of the background. So let's pick the image output here, plug it into one of the inputs and then the other from the environment into the other input. And let's connect this with the viewer node to see what's going on here. And you can see it's the other way around. So let's flip these inputs. And now the creature is back on our ground here. Then let's select the alpha over node, Shift D, plug it behind here, and let's add the background. And again, let's flip this. So now we have our image back together, quite easy. So, but you can see all the inputs are flipped. So let's move this render layer to the top and the same for this one. So everything is a bit more in order, and even the viewer node can be moved to the top here. Also, we can make this here a bit bigger if you like. Shift home button to full screen this. And now let's do a few brightness adjustments. Let's move these render layers over to the side. First, let's start with the background because this takes most of the space in our image, then the environment here, and then the creature. So first, let's hit Shift A, search for the hue saturation value node and plug it behind the render layer of the background. And all the values I set up here, I tested before. So I played around with the whole setup a lot before I came to these values. So again, it's trial and error. It's nothing you type in once and it will fit immediately. So take your time to adjust everything to your specific needs. So with the hue saturation value node, you can change the hue, so basically the color. Then you can change the saturation, so you can make it black and white or very colorful if you like. And you can change the value, which makes it darker or brighter. So, and I want the creature to stand out and I want these scales to glow. So I want to make it a bit darker, maybe 0.5. And it's also pretty blue. So let's take out some of the color by reducing the saturation. And we can also check if a different color here in the background works better. Maybe giving this like a slightly blue and yellowish tinted background fits quite nicely. So maybe 0.9 works good here. Then to add a bit of contrast here, you can add the gamma node with a value of 1.2, which works quite nicely. So the middle area is a bit darker, but we still have these brighter spots here. And this is pretty much everything I want to do to the background, for now at least. Then let's continue with the environment here. So here we want to keep it relatively simple. So let's duplicate the hue saturation value node, Shift D, plug it in here, and let's reset everything back to the default values, 0.5, 1, and 1. And let's see what we do here. First of all, I want this to be a bit darker so it's not too much distracting from the creature. So let's see how dark, maybe not too dark. Maybe something like this. And let's also take out some of the saturation, but not too much. We still want to have a bit of the red color in here. So let's go with these values for now. We can, of course, adjust this at any time. And now I want to add some brightness to the creature. For this, let's add the exposure node and plug it behind this here, which is connected to the alpha over. And here we can increase the exposure, which will make the creature a bit brighter. So it should really pop here. I think let's go with 0.5 for now. So now, so that everything don't become a big mess, we can clean this up a bit. So let's select these here. When all these are selected, press Ctrl and J to add a frame. When this is selected, press N, go to Node, and under Label, add a name. Let's call it Background. And under Properties, you can also increase the label size. Then here, let's do the same. Environment. And this one, Ctrl J, will be the creature. This will make everything a bit cleaner and clearer the more nodes we add over time. In the end, also make sure that this is always connected with the composite node. And let's press N to close this window. So as next step, let's add the mist pass. For this, we need another render layer. Let's put it down here. And here, let's switch to the mist render layer. And you can see that besides the image output, we also have alpha, which is a mask for transparency. And we also have the mist output here. Hold down Ctrl, Shift, left click here. And when you again left click, you can cycle through all these outputs here. And this is a mist pass. And this we now want to use to add a little bit of atmospheric fog to the scene here. First, hit Shift A and search for the color ramp and plug it behind here. This is always useful to make adjustments to these black and white masks. You can see if I cut away a little bit from the black, the mist will move further in the background. Or we can make it thicker by moving the white handle over to the left. So now we want to add this to our scene. Hit Shift A and search for the mix node. A mix node can basically mix two different inputs here, two different images, for example, with this mix factor and different blending modes. So here, this we want to use as mask. So this is a black and white image already. That means if I now plug this into the mix factor and Ctrl Shift left click here, I can change these colors. That means here from this mask, everything black will be input 1 and everything white will be input 2. 2. So input 2 will be the mist and input 1 should be the image we have here. So let's see how this looks. Now you can see we are adding this mist on top here. And now I can change the color and then we have all sorts of colorful mist. So, but you can see the background is also tinted. So we need to somehow cut away the background here. And the good thing is we also have this alpha mask, which masks out the creature and also the ground here. And this we want to subtract from this image here so that the whole background is completely black. In order to do so, let's Shift D, add a mix node behind here. Then let's use the alpha as mix factor. And then I think this should be input 2. Yeah, and then the red color should be completely black. That means the mist, when we add it back on top of our image, will only affect this area down here and the creature. So then let's use the last alpha over node output over here. Let's plug this out and Control Shift left click over here and add it to this image. So and here, instead of using the color ramp directly, we need to use this output as a mix factor. Now you see what I mean. The mist is now only visible down here and on the creature, but not on the background. So this mist effect is of course way too strong, so let's make it way darker. And I think here let's also go with a slightly purple color. Let's zoom in here a bit, and basically when we push this down at some point, this should look as if this is naturally fitting into the image, so it should not make the ground here and the creature pop out too much. So let's select this node, press M, then this will be muted, and then you can see the image without, and if I press M again, you can see it with the effect. On the creature it will only have a slight effect, I think, barely visible. But yeah, it adds a little bit of atmospheric depth to the image. Then let's select all these nodes here and maybe even this one, Ctrl J. And you can also select this, press F2 and label this as mist, press N and change the label size to something like 40. Then let's move everything a bit closer together. And maybe let's add it here to the top and move these two over a bit. So these are the changes I want to do in this video. However, we are not done yet. We want to make these bigger red scales glow, and we want to also make the background glow a bit over the rocks here. And we want to add some general image effects like chromatic aberration, a little bit of film grain and a vignette effect. But all this stuff we do in the next video. But before we continue, as always, don't forget to save.